Hello friends, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start with the Namo Tassa as usual. Feel free to join in if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So again, welcome to today's Sutta class. Today we will continue talking about the Sutta with Pukusati, so the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, or the Sutta on the exposition of the elements. So this is Majjhima Nikaya number 140. And this is a very beautiful and very unique sutta. And last time we've read the first half. And we saw that in this sutta, the Buddha gives us a summary of the path or of the practice all the way towards arahantship. That is very unusual. And the Buddha says that the path rests on 4 foundations. And those 4 foundations are not neglecting wisdom, preserving truth, cultivating relinquishment, and training for peace. So this is a summary of the entire path, and it's unique to the sutta that we are reading. And then the Buddha breaks this down, all those 4 foundations, and he talks about each foundation in detail and gives us instructions how to actually practice that. And the first one, of course, was not neglecting wisdom or developing wisdom. And he explained that in terms of contemplating the 6 elements. And last time we have already gone through the first 5 elements in detail. So these are the earth element, which refers to solid matter, the water element, which refers to all kinds of matter that is liquid, the air element, which refers to all kinds of matter that is in the state of gases, and then the fire element, which is refers to energy transformations between different states of matter. And then the space element, which is, of course, the emptiness around the matter that is necessary for matter to change and to transform from one state into another. So this is necessary for us to observe changes and to observe impermanence. And the one element that we haven't looked at yet is the consciousness element. So this refers to the mental experience in our life. So anything that has to do with consciousness, with the mind, with mental states, all that is lumped together under the consciousness element. And this is where we will continue reading our sutta today. I've put a link in the live chat to Piku Bodhi's translation, which is what I'll be reading from. Of course, you're also free to read from any other translation, such as, for example, Bhante Sujato's. And we continue reading at paragraph number SC26, which starts with the words, "Then there remains only consciousness, purified and bright." So if you want to read along, hopefully you found the place. And we can start. And the sutta goes as follows. "Then there remains only consciousness, purified and bright. What does one cognize with that consciousness? One cognizes this is pleasant. One cognizes this is painful. One cognizes this is neither painful nor pleasant. Independence on a contact to be felt as pleasant, there arises a pleasant feeling. When one feels a pleasant feeling, one understands. I feel a pleasant feeling. One understands with the cessation of that same contact to be felt as pleasant, its corresponding feeling, the pleasant feeling that arose in dependence on that contact to be felt as pleasant, ceases and subsides. Independence on a contact to be felt as painful, there arises a painful feeling. When one feels a painful feeling, one understands, I feel a painful feeling. One understands, with the cessation of that same contact to be felt as painful, its corresponding feeling, the painful feeling that arose in dependence on that contact to be felt as painful, ceases and subsides. In dependence on a contact to be felt as neither painful nor pleasant, there arises a neither painful nor pleasant feeling. When one feels a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, one understands, I feel a neither painful nor pleasant feeling. One understands, with the cessation of that same contact to be felt as neither painful nor pleasant, its corresponding feeling, the neither painful nor pleasant feeling that arose in dependence on that contact to be felt as neither painful nor pleasant, ceases and subsides. Piku, just as from the contact and friction of two fire sticks, heat is generated and fire is produced, and with the separation and disjunction of those two fire sticks, the corresponding heat ceases and subsides, so too, in dependence on a contact to be felt as pleasant, to be felt as painful, or to be felt as neither painful nor pleasant, there arises a pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant feeling. One understands, with the cessation of that same contact to be felt as neither painful nor pleasant, its corresponding feeling ceases and subsides. So now the Buddha is talking about the mental experience. And of course, in our daily life, when we don't pay attention with proper wisdom, it can appear to us that our mental experience is extremely diverse. Not only do we get input from all the five material senses, so the sight, the hearing, the taste, smell, taste, and touches, but also we can think about all the mental, like we can think in the mind and we can daydream and we can imagine a lot of different things. So it can seem to us that we are experiencing a very wide range of very diverse mental states. But the Buddha here breaks it down to the feeling tone that we have when we experience things, and that can either be pleasant or painful or kind of neutral, neither painful nor pleasant. So that makes it much easier to see, like when we simplify things, it's much easier to see what is going on. And in the end, any kind of experiences that we have, either we like them because they're pleasant, or we don't like them because they're painful, or we're kind of neutral towards them because they're neither painful nor pleasant. So if we categorize it that way, it's much easier because it's much simpler, and so it's easier to understand what is going on. And here, of course, with this passage, the Buddha ties in to the 18 kinds of mental exploration that he explained in the beginning of the sutta, which we went through last time. And the 18 kinds of mental exploration was the 6 senses, the 3 kinds of feeling that we can feel with the experiences through the 6 senses. So 6 by 3, 6 times 3 is obviously 18. So that's where the 18 kinds of mental explorations came from. And so this passage ties in with what he explained in the beginning. And it really breaks down all the mental experiences that we can have into very, very simple categories so that we can observe this directly while we are meditating, and we can contemplate this and properly understand what is going on. And the important thing that we should observe, or we should contemplate, or how we should develop wisdom with these kind of experiences, is that we understand that feeling, whether it is painful or pleasant or neutral, it arose from a cause. It arose because there was a contact. So there was a contact through one of the 6 sense bases. Because of that, if the contact is pleasant, then a pleasant feeling arises. If the contact is painful, a painful feeling arises. And if the contact is neutral, then a neutral feeling arises. And when that contact disappears, then the feeling also disappears. So again, we are trying to understand that everything that we experience through the material senses, or also through the sense of the mind, all this is conditioned. Again, there's no self, there is no I. Everything is an entirely impersonal process. So we are really trying to understand impermanence here, and we are trying to understand non-self. So anicca and anatta. And this is the wisdom that we are trying to cultivate when we contemplate this consciousness element. And the Buddha gives the simile of the fire sticks. So if we rub 2 fire sticks together, then there is heat. If we take those 2 sticks apart, then the heat dissipates and disappears. In the same way, if there's a contact, there is a feeling. If the contact doesn't occur anymore, the feeling also goes away, just in the same way that the heat would go away. So the entire process is entirely impersonal. It has nothing to do with any kind of self or any kind of I or any kind of ego. That's the wisdom that we should cultivate when we contemplate on the consciousness element. And if we are successful in doing this, then what happens is explained in the next paragraph. And the Buddha says, then there remains only equanimity, purified and bright, malleable, wieldy, and radiant. Suppose Piku, a skilled goldsmith, or his apprentice, were to prepare a furnace. Heat up the crucible, take some gold with tongs, and put it into the crucible. From time to time, he would blow on it. From time to time, he would sprinkle water over it. And from time to time, he would just look on. That gold would become refined, well refined, completely refined, faultless, rid of dross, malleable, wieldy, and radiant. Then whatever kind of ornament he wished to make from it, whether a golden chain, or earrings, or a necklace, or a golden garland, it would serve his purpose. So too, Bhikkhu, then there remains only equanimity, purified and bright, malleable, wieldy, and radiant. And that Bhikkhu understands thus: if I were to direct this equanimity so purified and bright to the base of infinite space, and to develop my mind accordingly, then this equanimity of mine, supported by that base, clinging to it, would remain for a very long time. If I were to direct this equanimity so purified and bright to the base of infinite consciousness, to the base of nothingness, to the base of neither perception nor non-perception, and to develop my mind accordingly, then this equanimity of mine, supported by that base, clinging to it, would remain for a very long time. He understands thus: if I were to direct this equanimity so purified and bright to the base of infinite space and to develop my mind accordingly, this would be conditioned. If I were to direct this equanimity so purified and bright to the base of infinite consciousness, to the base of nothingness, to the base of neither perception nor non-perception, and to develop my mind accordingly, this would be conditioned. So they do not form any condition or generate any volition tending towards either being or non-being. Since they do not form any condition or generate any volition tending towards either being or non-being, they do not cling to anything in the world. When they do not cling, they're not agitated. When they're not agitated, they personally attain nirvana. They understand thus: birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there's no more coming to any state of being. So here now, the Buddha explains what happens if you really contemplate the 6 elements in the ways that he just described, especially the impermanent nature of that entire process and the impersonal nature of the entire process. So clearly seeing that there is no self there, and to deconstruct this habit that we have to constantly construct this I or this self that really isn't there. Then what remains is only a completely still and pure mind. So a mind with total equanimity. And that mind then can access very deep states of samadhi. And the Buddha says that mendicant could contemplate directing their mind towards all these very high attainments, the immaterial attainments, such as the base of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. And the Buddha says, well, you could, the bhikkhu could contemplate, the mendicant could contemplate. If they direct their mind there, then they could have a rebirth that lasts for a very, very long time. And rebirth in these formless realms is incredibly long. So it covers many, many lifespans of universes. It's like an unimaginably long time that the lifespan of such a being reborn in such a realm can last. But still, that mendicant or that practitioner clearly sees, even though the lifespan is so long, still it is not permanent. Eventually, the lifespan will come to an end, and you will again be caught in the wheel of samsara and will fall back into suffering. So that still is conditioned. The condition is that they directed their mind there, and that's why they were reborn. They would have been reborn there. But this is not the unconditioned. This is not nirvana yet. So they clearly see that even those very high rebirths are not a way out of suffering. Even though the lifespan and the happiness would be for a very long time, still it's not eternal, still it is impermanent. And so they detach even from these extremely high rebirths. They detach even from this extremely refined kind of happiness, because they still see that it's not a final solution to the problem of suffering. And because they don't form any condition or generate any volition, here, as the text says, they don't form any condition or generate any volition tending towards either being or non-being. And for that reason, they don't cling to anything. They don't cling to either being or to continue existing, and they also don't wish to stop existing. So this is often called the two extremes: the extreme of eternalism and the extreme of annihilationism. And of course, we all know in Buddhism we practice the middle path, so we don't tend to either extreme. We know that eternalism is a wrong view because it presupposes a stable, permanent self. And also annihilationism is a wrong view. In Buddhism, of course, the middle path is described by dependent origination, so conditioned existence. Not an absolute eternal existence, but a conditioned existence, which is the middle path. Based on conditions, results come into being, and when the conditions cease, those results also cease. So we steer that person who has seen deeply into the process and deeply has understood impermanence and deeply has understood the impersonal nature of everything that exists in samsara wouldn't tend to either of these two extremes, being or non-being, or eternalism and annihilationism. For that reason, they don't cling to anything, and for that reason, they personally attain nibbana. And of course, when you attain nibbana, you understand you have no more future rebirth. You have done what you had to do. All your work is done. All your defilements have been dissolved. All your fetters have been cut. All the wrong views have been given up. So you're completely freed, and there's no more coming into any state of being. And the way such an enlightened being, such an enlightened being still continues to exist as long as their body is viable and as long as their body can support life. So they still continue to experience the outside world just in the same way as they experienced it before they became arahants. And now the Buddha describes how such a being would process the sense impressions that they get from the outside world. So the Buddha says, if they feel a pleasant feeling, they understand it is impermanent. There's no holding to it. There's no delight in it. If they feel a painful feeling, they understand it is impermanent. There is no holding to it. There is no delight in it. If they feel a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, they understand it is impermanent. There's no holding to it. There's no delight in it. If they feel a pleasant feeling, they feel it detached. If they feel a painful feeling, they feel it detached. If they feel a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, they feel it detached. When they feel a feeling terminating with the body, they understand, I feel a feeling terminating with the body. When they feel a feeling terminating with life, they understand, I feel a feeling terminating with life. They understand, on the dissolution of the body, with the ending of life, all that is felt, not being delighted in, will become cool right here. Piku, just as an oil lamp burns in dependence on oil and a wick. And when the oil and wick are used up, if it does not get any more fuel, it is extinguished from lack of fuel. So too, when they feel a feeling terminating with the body, or when they feel a feeling terminating with life, they understand, I feel a feeling terminating with the body or with life. They understand, on the dissolution of the body, with the ending of life, all that is felt not being delighted in will become cool right here. Therefore, a mendicant possessing this wisdom possesses the supreme foundation of wisdom. For this mendicant is the supreme noble wisdom, namely the knowledge of the destruction of all suffering. So, this is how an arahant goes through life. They still feel feelings, they still have contact because their sense spaces are still working. They still have eyes, they still have ears, they still have a body. So they still get all the sense impressions and they still get painful, pleasant, and neutral feelings. But there is no clinging to the pleasant feeling. There is no aversion to the painful feeling, and there is no boredom with the neutral feeling. If there's a pleasant feeling, they fully understand that this is has the three characteristics. It's impermanent, it is unsatisfactory, and it is impersonal, non-self. So they don't hold on to it, they don't cling to it, they don't delight in it, they don't crave for this. So they don't create any future karma, they don't create any more sankharas. They're just completely detached, even though the feeling is pleasant. There is no attraction to that feeling because they know it's entirely impersonal and it's entirely impermanent. It's unsatisfactory. It's not worth delighting in. And the same for the painful feeling. They still have painful bodily feelings, but they don't have aversion to that. They clearly see it's impermanent. When the cause of this painful feeling ceases, their painful feeling will also go away. And the same for the neither painful nor pleasant feeling. It's equally impermanent and equally impersonal. So for an arahant, that wisdom is always present because their mind is so clear. It's no longer troubled by any kind of defilement. There is no longer any kind of ignorance there. The wisdom is present at all times. So, and for that reason, they're naturally mindful all the time because there's nothing there that could obscure their mindfulness or that could distract them because no defilement is left in their mind. And even when they have feelings that are so life-threatening that the arahant would know this feeling will only go away when the body dies or when my life comes to an end. Even in that case, they would still be entirely detached because they would still see that it's entirely impermanent and entirely impersonal, and they wouldn't cling to the body anymore because they also see that the body isn't theirs. It's not like my body, it's just a material agglomeration of the various different elements. So there's nothing personal. They don't cling to the body for that reason. If there's a life-threatening incident, they wouldn't become worried about that either. And yeah, then the Buddha explains what happens on the dissolution of the body of an arahant. So the Buddha says, on the dissolution of the body, with the ending of life, all that is felt, not being delighted in, will become cool right here. So, of course, we know that the word nibbana, if we translate it, it means extinguishment, in the same way that, for example, if you have a burning flame, like a candle, for example, or a fire, and that fire can become extinguished. In the same way, we like for those kind of things, we can use the word nibbana. So the fire nibbanas, the fire becomes extinguished. And the Buddha here uses that simile of the oil lamp. And an oil lamp burns in dependence on oil and a wick, and eventually the oil or the wick or both will be used up. And then if there's no more fuel added, then that lamp will just go out. And in the same way, for an arahant has, for example, the 5 khandhas. And we if we are not arahants, then we constantly create new karma, we constantly create new sankharas, and we constantly add new seeds that will guide us towards a future rebirth. But because an arahant doesn't have any of this, there's no more seeds or no more karma that can carry them over to a new rebirth. So when their body comes to an end, then the 5 khandhas will just be extinguished, will just go out in the same way that a flame goes out in an oil lamp. And as the Buddha says here, they will just become cool right there. They will just go out. And then the Buddha says, if you contemplate like this, if you develop to this extent, so to arahantship, that is when your wisdom has become the supreme foundation of wisdom. So that is when you really have gone all the way with the wisdom, when you have fulfilled the first foundation, when you have not neglected wisdom, or when you have developed wisdom. So this is his explanation of the first foundation, not neglecting wisdom. Now we still have 3 foundations to go: preserving truth, cultivating relinquishment, and training for peace. And these are described in a much, much shorter way. And not neglecting wisdom was actually the main part of this sutta. But now we move on to preserving truth. And the Buddha says that mendicant's deliverance, being founded upon truth, is unshakable. For that is false, bhikkhu, which has a deceptive nature, and that is true, which has an undeceptive nature, nibbana. Therefore, a bhikkhu possessing this truth possesses the supreme foundation of truth. For this bhikkhu is the supreme noble truth, namely nibbana, which has an undeceptive nature. So this is the entire instruction for preserving truth. So obviously, in our daily life, as we live, we are constantly under the sway of greed, hatred, and delusion. And as long as we have delusion in our minds, we cannot follow the supreme truth, because we cannot see the truth clearly. We're constantly deluded. We are constantly under the sway of ignorance. And so we are constantly not only deceiving others, but we are constantly deceiving ourselves. We constantly think that things that are actually impermanent are permanent. We constantly take things to be personal when they're actually impersonal. We constantly delight in things when actually they are unsatisfactory. So we're constantly deceiving ourselves. We are not adhering to truth. We're not preserving truth. But when we reach arahantship and we clearly see through that, that is when we actually deeply preserve truth, when we are no longer deceiving ourselves and when we are no longer under the sway of the defilements. So only when we reach to that stage do we actually live in our own truth. And we only at that point can we actually see what has an undeceptive nature, i.e. nibbana. And so only at this point do we actually deeply preserve truth. And then the Buddha moves on to cultivating relinquishment. And he says, formerly, when they were ignorant, they undertook and accepted acquisitions. Now they have abandoned them, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, done away with them so that they are no longer subject to future arising. Therefore, a mendicant possessing this relinquishment possesses the supreme foundation of relinquishment. For this bhikkhu is the supreme noble relinquishment, namely the relinquishment of all acquisitions. So, so the Buddha says, usually when we're not arahants in our daily life, then we constantly accept acquisitions. So these are not only material possessions that we cling to, that we think are our possessions, or like even our own body, or whatever other things that are out there in the material world that we think are our possessions, our acquisitions. But especially this also refers to the mental states that we cling to and that we acquire over time. So all the habit patterns that we have, the defilements that we have collected over time, and if we keep on following those defilements, then they become stronger and stronger. And it's like we acquire more and more delusion all the time. And this is like the normal state of being in samsara, just accumulating more and more of these delusional mental states and physical matters. But as an arahant, we have seen through all that, we have let go of all these acquisitions, both our material possessions and our mental patterns. And we have completely cut them off so that they can no longer arise in the future, so that our mind is entirely calm and entirely peaceful. And when we have gone all the way to arahantship, at that point, we have the supreme foundation of relinquishment. Like there's no relinquishment that could be deeper than that, because all the mental states that are unwholesome have been let go of. For that reason, it is called supreme noble relinquishment. So that is how you cultivate the third foundation, cultivating relinquishment. And then the Buddha moves on to the fourth foundation, which is training for peace. And the Buddha says, formerly, when they were ignorant, they experienced covetousness, desire, and lust. Now they have abandoned them, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, done away with them, so that they are no longer subject to future arising. Formerly, when they were ignorant, they experienced anger, ill will, and hate. Now they have abandoned them, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, done away with them, so that they are no longer subject to future arising. Formerly, when they were ignorant, they experienced ignorance and delusion. Now they've abandoned them, cut them off at the root, made them like a palm stump, done away with them, so that they are no longer subject to future arising. Therefore, a bhikkhu possessing this peace possesses the supreme foundation of peace. For this bhikkhu is the supreme noble peace, namely the pacification of lust, hate, and delusion. So, how do you get to supreme peace, or how do you fulfill the foundation of training for peace? And the Buddha says, of course, there are the three evil roots, which are greed, anger, and delusion. And as non-arahants, we are under the sway of these three roots, greed, hatred, and delusion. But as arahants, we have entirely cut off those three roots, so they can never arise again in the future. And if those roots can never arise, at that point, we experience the supreme kind of mental peace. So any kind of mental peace that we experience before this point is always temporary, and always one or more of those roots could arise again and could cause restlessness in the mind, or could cause other kinds of problems in the mind and destroy the peace that we have. But if we have completely cut off these three roots, at that point, the peace is unshakable. It can no longer be destroyed by any kind of defilement. And for that reason, this is the supreme peace. And at that point, we have fulfilled the foundation of training for peace. So, and the Buddha says, so it was with reference to this that it was said, one should not neglect wisdom, should preserve truth, should cultivate relinquishment, and should train for peace. So now the Buddha has described the pathway to arahantship in this framework with those four foundations. And I think he has done it in a lot of detail, obviously. Even though later he says he's just given a brief exposition, so he could have gone into a lot of detail. But I think it's already quite detailed at this point. And now the Buddha moves on to another very, very beautiful simile that I think is unique to this sutta here, which is the simile of the tides of conceiving. Or maybe it's not a simile, maybe it's more a metaphor. Anyway, it's a very unique metaphor and a very beautiful metaphor. And he says, The tides of conceiving do not sweep over one who stands upon these foundations. And when the tides of conceiving no longer sweep over them, they're called a sage at peace. So it was said, and with reference to what was this said. So this is what the Buddha already said at the beginning of this sutta, in the summary of the sutta. And now he's explaining what this means. So the Buddha says, one who has fulfilled those four foundations, so basically who has become an arahant, who has cultivated the wisdom, who has preserved truth, cultivated relinquishment, and trained for peace, that person can no longer be swept away by the tides of conceiving. So I think the image here is very strong and very beautiful, and we can imagine how a person is usually swept away by very high waves and just tossed around in the ocean, and pulled by the current up and down, and like close to drowning and in a very difficult, dangerous situation. And this is obviously exactly what happens to us in samsara, being just pulled up and down through the rounds of rebirth in the various different realms and various different states of existence without any direction. So those tides of conceiving just pull us around and round without any kind of purpose or without any kind of aim or goal. And this is what samsara is. But if you have cultivated those four foundations, then you are a sage at peace, and those tides of conceiving can no longer pull you around or sweep you around. And now the Buddha explains what those tides of conceiving are. And he says, Piku, I am is a conceiving. I am this is a conceiving. I shall be is a conceiving. I shall not be is a conceiving. I shall be possessed of form is a conceiving. I shall be formless is a conceiving. I shall be percipient is a conceiving. I shall be nonpercipient is a conceiving. I shall be neither percipient nor nonpercipient is a conceiving. Conceiving is a disease. Conceiving is a tumor. Conceiving is a dart. By overcoming all conceivings, Piku, one is called a sage at peace. And the sage at peace is not born, does not age, does not die. They're not shaken and do not yearn. For there is nothing present in them by which they might be born. Not being born, how could they age? Not aging, how could they die? Not dying, how could they be shaken? Not being shaken, why should they yearn? So it was with reference to this that it was said, the tides of conceiving do not sweep over one who stands upon these foundations. And when the tides of conceiving no longer sweep over them, they're called a sage at peace. Bhikkhu, bear in mind this brief exposition of the 6 elements. So the Buddha explains here what the tides of conceiving means. And first he says, the notion I am is a conceiving. So it's something that we think up in the mind, a view that we form, a notion that we develop, that the notion of our personal existence, the notion that there is a permanent self. And obviously this is a wrong view, this is a false view. And if we have properly contemplated the 6 elements, we've already seen that there is nothing permanent, nothing stable, and nothing personal. Everything is just an impersonal process. So this idea of I am, I exist, that is a wrong view, that is a conceiving. And once we have the view that I exist, then we can develop that in the various forms. So for example, I am this particular thing or idea or notion, that is also a conceiving. And I shall be, so then we think that we will continue to exist in the future. So we think about rebirth, we think about ideas of eternalism, or we think of the opposite, I shall not be in the future. So then we think about annihilationism, that we cease to exist at death, for example. All these ideas come to be once we think about personal existence. And then we think about different ways of being reborn. For example, I shall be possessed of form means that we will have another body in the next life. Or we think I shall be formless, means we don't have a body in the next life. That means we think we would be reborn in the immaterial realms in the next life. We can think I shall be recipient in the next life. So that means rebirth in any of the realms, from the lowest hell realms all the ways through the human realm, the sense sphere heaven realms, the fine material realms, up to the realm of nothingness. All the beings in all these realms are considered percipient beings, beings that have perceptions, that have sanya. Or we could develop the idea that in the next life I shall be non-percipient. So there are actually beings that are reborn with just a material body, but no mental activity. So in that case, you're non-percipient because there is no mental activity. And the khanda of sanya, perception, is not there. So for those beings, they just exist as a material being. And when that material body breaks up, because obviously that is also an impermanent existence, just as anything is impermanent, then they are reborn in another state and their mental faculties arise again. So there are non-percipient beings, and you could theoretically think that you will be reborn there. Or you could have the conceiving, I shall be neither percipient nor non-percipient. And that means you would be reborn in the state of neither perception nor non-perception. So that is the highest formless attainment that you can have. And obviously this is also a possible place of rebirth. But all these are conceivings. In all these cases, you think about a personal existence of an I that exists, a self that exists. And for that reason, it's all wrong view. It's all conceivings. And those types of conceivings will lead you to future rebirth and keep you trapped in samsara. So that's why it's called the tides of conceiving that sweep you up and down and around in samsara. And the Buddha says this kind of conceiving is a disease, a tumor, and a dart. So it makes you sick. It keeps you in suffering. It's like a tumor that overgrows your entire experience, and everything that you experience is under this delusional idea of a permanent self. And this is why you have ignorance and you don't have wisdom and you don't awaken to the truth and you can't see things as they actually are. And it's like a dart, something that is stuck in your mind or stuck in your heart, and that causes you a lot of suffering. But the Buddha says if you overcome all these conceivings, so if you become an arahant, then you're called a sage at peace. At that point, you're at peace. And of course, if you're at peace, then you're no longer born. There's no future rebirth. Since there's no rebirth, you also don't age. You also don't die. Obviously, if you don't have to fear dying, if you don't have to fear suffering, you're not shaken. You're entirely at peace. And if you're entirely at peace, you have no reason to yearn for anything, because you already have supreme peace. So you don't need anything further. You already have everything that you could possibly want. So there's no future yearning, no future wanting. Since there is no yearning, you don't create any future karma. And since there's no karma, you have no future rebirth. So it's kind of, a sage at peace is just completely stable in that peace. And there's no future rebirth. That arahant experiences complete peace. And as the Buddha says, not being shaken, why should you yearn? If you have complete peace, why would you yearn? Why would you create any future karma? So Buddha says for this reason, he gave this exposition, and the tides of conceiving can no longer sweep someone around if you have developed those 4 foundations and you're entirely at peace. And here it says, Piku, bear in mind this brief exposition of the 6 elements. So he calls this a brief exposition. Obviously, it seems like he's gone into a lot of detail, but him being the Buddha, we also know that he could have explained this in a lot more detail also. But this is the ending of his Dhamma talk at this point, obviously, because he has explained the path all the way to arahantship. And at this point now, finally, Pukusati realizes who he has been talking with this whole time. And Pukusati thinks, indeed, the teacher has come to me. The sublime one has come to me. The fully enlightened one has come to me. Then he rose from his seat, arranged his upper robe over one shoulder, and prostrating himself with his head at the Blessed One's feet, he said, Venerable Sir, a transgression overcame me, in that like a fool, confused and blundering, I presumed to address the Blessed One as friend. Venerable Sir, may the Blessed One forgive my transgression, seen as such, for the sake of restraint in the future. And the Buddha says, Surely, Bhikkhu, a transgression overcame you, in that like a fool, confused and blundering, you presumed to address me as friend. But since you see your transgression as such and make amends in accordance with the Dhamma, we forgive you. For it is growth in the noble one's discipline when one sees one's transgressions as such and makes amends in accordance with the Dhamma and undertakes restraint in the future. So if you recall from last time, Pukusati and the Buddha were meeting in a potter's workshop. And Pukusati did not know that the Buddha was the Buddha. Pukusati was wandering around in search of the Buddha, and he thought that he was just meeting some random ascetic. He didn't even know that he was meeting a Buddhist monastic, and especially he didn't know that he was meeting the Buddha himself. And the Buddha also didn't reveal to Pukusati who he was. The Buddha just gave him a Dhamma teaching. But now through the teaching, Pukusati finally realized that such a deep teaching, such a profound, transformative talk can only come from the Buddha himself. So finally, he realizes that he's in the presence of the Buddha himself. And then, of course, he pays respect, and he's kind of embarrassed that he didn't treat the Buddha with the proper respect in the beginning, and that he called him a friend as though they were like kind of on the same level. And now he's finally treating the Buddha as though like he's recognizing the hierarchy between the two, and is treating the Buddha with more respect, because now he knows who is with him at this point. And I think it's just so beautiful to imagine that, you know, back in the day, that could actually happen, and you could just meditate somewhere and the door opens and the Buddha walks in and he gives you a Dhamma teaching. I think it's just so beautiful to imagine that these kind of things actually happened. And of course, the Buddha accepts Pukusati's apology, and he praises him for admitting a mistake. And of course, the Buddha now, here we see how the Buddha treats people who admit mistakes. He's not putting them down. He's not scolding them or anything. He accepts the apology, and he praises them for being willing to admit a mistake, and for personally growing. Because if you see a mistake, if you admit it, then you can grow personally and not make the mistake again in the future. But if you don't admit the mistake, then that is what is the problem. Then that is what is blameworthy. But if you open up to your mistakes and you own your mistakes and you try to become better, then that is praiseworthy, and everybody should support you in that. And that's what the Buddha is doing here for Pukusati, praising him and telling him that he's doing the right thing. And of course, at this point, Pukusati now says, Venerable Sir, I would receive the full admission under the Blessed One. So Pukusati is asking for the full ordination. As we have seen in the beginning, Pukusati was not ordained. Even though the Buddha calls him a Piku all the time, Pukusati actually doesn't have an ordination. He just shaved his head and he put on a robe and he walked out of his palace trying to find a Buddhist monastic or trying to find the Buddha. So he was at this point actually just a random ascetic, not yet a fully ordained proper Buddhist monk. So now obviously that he has finally found a Buddhist monastic, and especially the Buddha himself, now he can finally ask to have proper ordination into the Sangha. And of course, he is now using this opportunity to do that. And the Buddha says, but are your bowl and robes complete, Piku? And Pukusati says, Venerable Sir, my bowl and robes are not complete. Piku, Tathagatas do not give the full admission to anyone whose bowl and robes are not complete. So this is something that is still this way until today. When we have our ordination ceremonies, this is something we have to check. We have to check that the candidates for ordination have a bowl and have complete set of robes. So for monks, that means they have to have their 3 robes. For nuns, that means they have to have their 5 robes. And this really has to be your own things. You can't just borrow a bowl or a robe from someone else and give it back after the ordination. You have to make sure that every single candidate has the necessities of life, the ability to properly cover their body, and the ability to have a bowl so that they can go on alms run and actually get food and survive. So everybody has to have that minimum of personal items. And sometimes people want to be more ascetic and don't want to have that many robes or don't want to have a bowl or whatever. But this is actually the minimum level of material possessions that you need to have as a Buddhist monastic. You're not allowed to be more ascetic than this. So asceticism, just for the sake of being hardcore, is not something that is encouraged in Buddhism. There needs to be a minimum standard of things that you need to have so that your survival is ensured, and so that you're not making things more difficult for yourself than things actually need to be. So this is something we still observe until nowadays, and we check before ordinations that people have a bowl and their robes. And at this point, the Venerable Pukusati, having delighted and rejoiced in the Blessed One's words, rose from his seat, and after paying homage to the Blessed One, keeping him on his right, he departed in order to search for a bowl and robes. Then, while the Venerable Pukusati was searching for a bowl and robes, a stray cow killed him. Then a number of bhikkhus went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, they sat down at one side and told him, "Venerable Sir, the clansman Pukusati, who was given brief instruction by the Blessed One, has died. What is his destination? What is his future course?" Because the clansman Pukusati was wise, he practiced in accordance with the Dhamma and did not trouble me in the interpretation of the Dhamma. With the destruction of the 5 lower fetters, the clansman Pukusati has reappeared spontaneously in the pure abodes and will attain final Nibbana there without ever returning from that world. This is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So, unfortunately, Pukusati never got fully ordained. He was killed while searching for the requisites for ordination. But we see that he was able to make good use of this Dhamma teaching that he got from the Buddha. And as we have seen, or we have discussed last time, Pukusati already had a very, very strong practice in a past life. He already practiced under Kassapa Buddha. So he was able to properly make use of this very, very deep teaching. And he attained to anagamiship while this sutta was given to him. So he was able to make a huge amount of progress. And then, of course, as an anagami, a non-returner, he will never be reborn outside of the pure abodes anymore. And he's guaranteed to reach arahantship. And if you remember the story of the 7 monks in Kassapa Buddha's time, that we are sort of basing this series of teachings on, then you will remember that of those 7 monks in Kassapa Buddha's time, 1 of them became an arahant, 1 of them became an anagami, and 5 of them became bhikkhus in Gautama Buddha's time. So I like to think that Pukusati rejoined his former friend in the pure abodes, that other anagami. So the 2 of them kind of met up again in the pure abodes and were practicing there together until they both attained arahantship. So that's obviously just something I like to think about, but because both of them became anagamis and the other 5 monks all became arahants, maybe those 2 are now together still in the pure abodes. So that's just kind of thought that I had, and I thought it was nice that maybe those 2 former friends rejoined each other again there when they made so much progress. Both of them made so much progress in the practice and became anagamis. So this is the sutta with Pukusati, the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. And I know it was a very, very long sutta, and I've almost used up the time for today already. I know it was very long, but I didn't want to split it into a third part or a third session again. So I thought it was better to go a little bit longer today and to finish this sutta now. And at this point, we still have a few minutes left, and I will see if there are questions. And if there are any, I will try to answer them. And I see a lot of comments. And Parag Patel asks, how does one treat the mind elements? I think this entire sutta, I've just explained this. So basically investigating the pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings and seeing them as impermanent and impersonal. So I think I've gone into a lot of detail, so I don't have to explain that again. One person says, hello, I'm from Cambodia. So nice to see you, joining in from Cambodia. I have a very good friend. She is a bhikkhuni from Cambodia. So actually now we have 2 Cambodian bhikkhunis in the world. One of them ordained about 2 months ago. Her name is Ayya. And so it's very beautiful to see people joining in from Cambodia and to see also the Cambodian Bhikkhuni Sangha growing so much. So very welcome. Nice to see you here. And a person with a Sri Lankan username says, so how does a mendicant realize nirvana in the 9th jhana of cessation of feelings? So not everybody. So first of all, the 9th jhana is a misnomer. There are only 4 jhanas, and then there are 5 immaterial attainments. And cessation of perception and feeling is the highest of those 5 immaterial states. But not everybody has to go through the immaterial attainments. Some arahants go through the immaterial attainments. Some arahants only have the 4 jhanas or one of the 4 jhanas. So you don't necessarily have to attain cessation of perception and feeling. And also those are samadhi states. And samadhi states are helpful on the path, but the taints are destroyed through wisdom. So it is through seeing reality as it actually is and through developing wisdom that we realize nibbana. So by doing contemplations and by developing our wisdom practice is how we realize nibbana. Samadhi is helpful for that, but it's not in and of itself sufficient for realizing nibbana. And a few other people are also saying they're from Cambodia. So Diana says she's from Cambodia. So very nice to see you, Diana. Very happy to see people from Cambodia joining in. Then there is a very long comment from Piyal and Indira. And they say, do you enter Nibbana from formless jhana according to this description, or do they have to revert back to form jhana 4, 3, 2, and to 1 to contemplate this impermanence? As I understand, beyond the 2nd jhana, there is no more vitaka and vichara, directed thought and evaluation of thought. So there is no way one can contemplate on these elements, aggregates as impermanent beyond 2nd form jhana. And then the comment continues. Are the last 3 just alternate descriptions of nibbana, final truth, relinquishment, peace, etc.? I think these are 2 separate comments, so let's take this one first. So I suppose this is asking about the death of an arahant. When they finally pass away, do they pass away from the formless jhana? Or maybe the question is just if you can contemplate impermanence while in a jhana. So we have suttas such as the Anupada Sutta, which I think is Majjhima Nikaya number 110 or 111. It's called Anupada Sutta. And there Sariputta describes how he attained arahantship. And he went through all the attainments, including the formless attainments. And he said he was contemplating on the 3 characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, or impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and the impersonal nature or non-self. And he was doing that in the 4 jhanas and also in the first 3 of the formless attainments. So infinite space, infinite consciousness, and nothingness. But he was not able to do that contemplation in the attainment of neither perception nor non-perception, because that is too refined. If you no longer have perception, you cannot do any wisdom practices there. But on all the on all the states below neither perception nor non-perception, Sariputta says that he was doing it directly while in that state. Whereas in the state of neither perception or non-perception, and in the state of cessation and perception of feelings, he had to actually come out of that attainment before he could do any insight practices, or before he could understand about the impersonal nature and the impermanent nature of those states. So it is true that you cannot have active thinking, like thoughts, in any jhana above the first one. But you don't necessarily need to have verbalized thought in order to understand what is going on, in order to have your wisdom active as a faculty. So you can still make insights in higher jhanas, but it's not in the form of a verbalized thought. It's more of like a direct seeing what is going on. And according to Sariputta's description in the Anupada Sutta, he was able to do that even in the formless states, the first three of the formless states. But I think this is something that probably, in order to properly understand what's going on, that should be a proper Dhamma talk. And maybe at some point we can read the Anupada Sutta together and see what is going on there. And then Piyal and Indira also say, are the last three just alternate descriptions of Nibbana, final truth, relinquishment, peace, and so on? In some way, so I think these are the last three of the four foundations, because the Buddha went into a lot of detail how to develop wisdom, which is obviously a path. And then for the other three foundations, he didn't really go into any much detail. He just said, when you have developed that to the final extent, to the supreme extent, then that's what an arahant does, or how an arahant lives. So of course, if you have developed it to the final extent, that means you are an arahant. But in some way, we can also practice this. So adhering to truth or preserving truth is something that we can practice in our everyday life. It starts even with the 5 precepts. Like not lying is a form of preserving truth, obviously a very basic form. But if we can't even do that much, we can never preserving the more subtle forms of truth. So again, this is an entire practice path. We start with the most on the growth level with our speech, not trying to deceive people, not trying to lie, not trying to deceive ourselves. And then as we become more and more refined with that practice, then we can see how we mentally deceive ourselves all the time, how our defilements, how our delusion kind of tricks us into believing things that are not actually true all the time. So this is, like, in some way, these are also practice paths. And the same for relinquishment. Relinquishment is something that we start off like on a very small level by giving dana, by sharing with others, by supporting other people on their practice path, especially by supporting the Sangha. That's already relinquishing some things, like relinquishing material possessions. And as we practice more, we learn to relinquish defilements, we learn to relinquish unwholesome mental states, all the way until we reach the supreme foundation of relinquishment. And for peace, in the same way, we start small by going to a peaceful environment, trying to have like the material surroundings peaceful, not by keeping 8 precepts, by not indulging too much in music or entertainment or anything that stirs up our mind, that makes us unpeaceful, and then developing that further and further until we reach the final peace, like developing deeper meditations, developing samadhi and jhanas and so on, until finally we reach the peace of arahantship. So in some ways, this is not only nibbana, but this is also a practice path. And Om asks, would I say that conceiving is becoming? No, I don't think that conceiving is necessarily becoming. Conceiving is a mental activity to form wrong views. So especially to form the view that I exist or a self exists, or there is a permanent self, a permanent personality there. So it's more of like the mental activity of creating those unwholesome views or those wrong kinds of ideas and wrong notions, wrong views. I think that is more what conceiving refers to here, a mental activity. And so Christina asks, to acquire insight knowledge about impermanence, do you have to be in meditation, breath, vipassana, or is it possible to get insight knowledge while doing a mundane thing? So, well, to acquire insight knowledge, definitely you have to do a lot of meditations and contemplations. For sure. So meditation is very, very important. And you can make those profound insights while you are in meditation. Excuse me. But if you have done a lot of meditation, some insights can also come while you're mindful when you're doing mundane things. So we know, for example, that Sariputta, he attained arahantship, I believe, while he was fanning the Buddha and listening to a Dhamma talk that the Buddha was giving to someone else. But of course, at that point, Sariputta was already very developed on the path. It's not that he randomly walked into a monastery one day, started to fan the Buddha, and then became an arahant. It's that he did a lot of practices, but the last final breakthrough happened while he was fanning the Buddha. So you can make insights while doing mundane activities, but that doesn't mean that you don't need to meditate. It's because you prepare the mind in meditation that, at some point the mind is ready, and then a small outside trigger can lead you to a deeper insight. And that can happen in meditation, but it could also happen outside of meditation. But you need to prepare the mind first. And then I see a lot of emojis here. Let's see if I can find another question. Here is another question from Sud. Is equanimity something that is closer to Nibbana? So equanimity obviously is a very helpful state on the path. It's also a very deep state on the path. It's one of the Brahma Viharas. It is a factor of the third and the fourth jhana, especially the fourth jhana. So it's a state that is extremely helpful both for samadhi practice and also for wisdom practices, because if your mind is equanimous, then it is very calm, very peaceful. It's very easy to see into reality as it actually is, which is obviously a prerequisite for attaining arahantship. So in that way, you could say equanimity is somewhat close to Nibbana because it is a very helpful mind state for making a breakthrough and for seeing things as they actually are. So making a breakthrough to stream entry or making a breakthrough to arahantship. But Nibbana itself does not have any kind of mental states. So Nibbana itself does not have equanimity. Equanimity is also a conditioned phenomenon. So it's helpful for breaking through, but of course, it's in and of itself, it's not sufficient for Nibbana. And in and of itself, it's also just a conditioned mental state. Okay, I see that there's one more question. So I'll take the last question because we've gone a little bit over time. So this is the last question we will answer for today. And Parag asks, are mind objects also reactionary, conditioned process like thoughts? Would the goal also be to have no reaction to our thoughts, feelings, emotions, knowing they are conditioned objects? So while we're practicing, we need to understand what is going on. We need to see them as they actually are in our mind. And if we have reactions to them, then we need to also acknowledge that. So it's not at all helpful to suppress them and to ignore them and to pretend that they're not there and to just try to pretend that we are equanimous all the time, because then they would just be pushed into our subconscious and they will create a lot of problems for us. They could create psychological problems, while we believe that we're already enlightened and we've just ignored and suppressed all our emotions and thoughts and feelings and so on. So what we need to do is acknowledge what is going on in our mind. And if there's a lot of anger, or if there's a lot of emotions that we don't like to deal with because they're unpleasant, then we shouldn't pretend that they're not there. We shouldn't suppress them. We shouldn't pretend that we are equanimous. We should just accept reality as it is for us in that moment, whatever is going on in our mind. And as the Buddha said, see that this is created from a contact. When the contact ceases, those feelings, emotions, thoughts will also cease. They're impermanent, they are unsatisfactory, they are impersonal. So trying to contemplate whatever is going on in terms of the three characteristics, trying to develop the wisdom. And as we detach from those things, and as we understand that they are not personal, that they are not ours, then we can let go of them. And then the pain and the thoughts and feelings and whatever unpleasant things are going on will over time gradually decrease, and our equanimity will naturally develop. So it's not that we try to suppress our reactions to our thoughts. It's that because we deeply understand that they're impersonal and that they're not our thoughts, that we naturally detach from them. But if we're not there yet, then just suppressing them and trying to not have a reaction is the wrong path. The right path is to see what is going on with wisdom and to let whatever is there just be there so that we can actually see it. So not suppressing it and not trying to have no reactions if we are not developed enough on the path yet. So it's much better to acknowledge everything that is there instead of trying to be equanimous when we are actually not yet. That can lead to spiritual bypassing, that can lead to psychological problems, that can lead to all sorts of things that can be quite unhealthy. And sometimes if this is something that you're struggling with, it's much better to actually talk with a teacher in person or a monastic in person rather than trying to get advice on the internet. Because if a teacher can see you face to face, it's much easier for them to give you advice rather than me talking to you through a screen and not really properly knowing your background and knowing what is going on for you. And okay, one last question has shown up. So this is really now the last one. If you type another question, then that will have to be answered next time. But this one I will just briefly answer. Aum asks, is there a practice of equanimity towards all beings, seeing all with the eyes of impartiality? Yes, there is such a practice because we practice the 4 Brahma Viharas. But if you do Brahma Vihara practice, the much better practice of being impartial towards all beings is to do metta practice. So metta practice is a more foundational practice. Only if you're really, really, really good at metta should you try to move on to practicing the other Brahma Vihara of equanimity, the Upekkha Brahma Vihara. So just focus on your metta practice first. That is also a very, very good practice to have metta towards all beings, friendliness towards all beings. And that way, if you have metta without any kind of discrimination, then also you're practicing impartiality towards all beings. And the equanimity will naturally develop out of your metta practice. So doing metta practice first is much better than starting with the equanimity practice, because that is a really, really very advanced state of being. And for beginners, it's very easy to think that you're doing equanimity practices when actually what you're doing is suppressing your emotions, or you're just training in spiritual bypassing, and you're going emotionally numb, and you're creating all sorts of problems for yourself. So doing metta practice is really a much safer and much more recommended way of practicing the Brahma Viharas. especially if you're not close to a teacher. So if you're practicing on your own, then really doing metta is much, much better than doing equanimity. So this was the last question for today. Thank you all for joining in, and thank you for having this lively discussion. I really enjoyed all the questions we had with this sutta. And as I mentioned, Pukusati Sutta or the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta is one of my favorite suttas. So I really enjoyed sharing this with you. And I hope you enjoyed it too. And we will end for today with 3 sadhus, and feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I will see you all on Thursday if you want. And if not, I will see you next Tuesday. Have a nice day.